Hey everyone, it's Amanda Gneininger from Progress, Texas, subbing in for Satvik this week. I'm joined by our Advocacy Manager, Diana Gomez, Communications Manager, Wesley Story, and our special guest, Ash Hall, who's the Policy Associate with Transgender Education Network of Texas, and a great personal friend. They're amazing, and we were just talking about how excited we are to have them on today. So today we're talking about some of the worst things of the week, unfortunately, but hopefully we can discuss some little hopes that we might have for the future here. But we're going to be discussing anti-trans bills that are making their way through the Texas Sledge and what it's like on the ground at the Capitol doing some of our other work. So to start us off, Wesley, do you want to tell us, well, here's our question first, but I'll start with Wesley. So yesterday, some happy home investors saw a huge spike in Dogecoin, which is a cryptocurrency started as a joke by two software engineers. If you woke up this morning to an unexpected windfall of cash, what do you think you'd do with it?
So one, I really feel like I should start investing in Dogecoin now because if all these people are making this money, then I feel a little bit of FOMO. But I guess it would depend on how much cash. To be honest, I really need a vacation. As you mentioned, the last few weeks at the Texas legislature have been wild and hellish. And so I just want to sit on a beach somewhere and not think about Texas politics for a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Diana, what about you?
I kind of hate that this is my answer because I am still praying and hoping Mr. Biden will cancel them all, but pay off my student loans. But then when that's out, we'll invest in like some sort of PAC or something to run amazing, young, progressive, diverse, queer candidates against all these terrible people at the Texas Capitol.
Ash, what about you?
Similarly, it would depend on how much money it was, but if it was enough, I would love to be able to afford a down payment on a house.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of in the same age category. We're like, houses, is it there yet?
Right.
Can I reach it?
Yeah.
But talking a little bit about the Capitol and some of the forms we'd like to see, and maybe some of the ones we don't like to see. So I heard a lot of things we're moving this week. With trans youth and trying to keep them out of sports. Ash, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about what those bills are and what they do?
Right. So there's two bills in particular that are moving that go after trans youth in student athletics. That's going to be Senate Bill 29 and House Bill 4042. So what these bills do is they say that these students cannot play student sports with their peers who share their gender identity. So that means that these students are either not going to be playing or they're going to be stuck on teams with people who they don't actually identify with. And furthermore, it kind of opens up this really unpleasant opportunity for folks to question their gender and like try to find out through very inappropriate methods what their gender or sex might be. So the whole thing is very invasive, inappropriate, problematic. And the truth is, I mean, these kids just need to be allowed to participate and have fun and be kids, you know? So what we saw this week was the Senate went ahead and passed SB 29. So that's moving to the House. House Bill 4042 is going to be getting a hearing next Tuesday. So there are opportunities, thankfully, for folks to come to the Capitol or send in calls or emails and speak out against these bills. And in doing so, protect the rights of these kids to play.
You know, I've also, just going off of what Ash mentioned, I've heard a lot of discussion from folks just talking about, oh, these bills aren't that bad. Like, what's the big deal? These kids may not be able to do sports, but that's not a huge deal. That doesn't have a real impact. And the fact of the matter is these bills are not based in science. Our legislators are saying that they're using science in order to pass these laws and make them into law. But really what they do is they're rooted in discrimination and in hate. And they continue to promote this stigma around transgender people in general, but it's specifically transgender children who we know already struggle with mental health issues and with acceptance from their peers and are more likely to potentially commit suicide. Sports bring immense value to childhood development. They allow kids to make friends, learn teamwork and cooperation, and really just improve mental and physical health. So banning a certain segment of the population from participating in athletics is really just a cruel, discriminatory way to show that we don't accept these people into our society and we're trying to other them. And so it has huge consequences when you look at the root reason why these bills are even being proposed to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I was just going to add, because you mentioned the mental health impact, something that I talked to the senators about when I testified against SB 29 is athletics and just being active. It's actually one of the most important parts of combating depression and anxiety. It's like one of the first questions that mental health care providers will ask folks when they're first meeting their new clients is, how active are you? And so the idea that we would deny kids who are already kind of struggling with mental health an opportunity to improve their mental health is mind-boggling to me.
And from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Ash, but these bills, they don't just affect trans kids, but potentially any kids who don't necessarily fit into conventional expectations of gender. So under these laws, any kid could be forced to forego like invasive tests, to have to prove their gender, which is just subjecting children to further humiliation and potentially long-lasting damage. Is that correct?
That is correct. And what I have seen based on different sports leagues and the like is that it is actually going to be Black cisgender girls in particular who suffer outside of transgender girls under this bill, because as it is, a lot of white athletes tend to question them whenever they particularly excel at athletics. So that is a deep concern that we have. I think we're going to see a very racist outcome should this bill become law as well.
Diana, we've heard a little bit about different sports entities and companies and different businesses in general coming out against a lot of these really discriminatory bills across the board, from abortion rights, abortion access, healthcare, and voting rights. What do you think is going to be the impact if the NCAA pulls out of Texas because of these bills attacking trans youth?
Yeah, I mean, it's been wild to see that the NCAA cares more about our youth here in Texas than our own legislators, than our own leaders. So thank you, NCAA, so much for setting this example. Country, wide, saying that they will not play a lot of their games in states that are attacking trans youth. And so, we really commend that. And I think that we've seen a lot of companies, a lot of corporations say that hateful bills that are discriminatory, towards gender identity, towards, a person's, race, they won't tolerate it. And we've seen this start to happen already post Georgia, when they've been passing their really discriminatory voting rights bills. And, and we've seen a lot of corporations say that they're going to stand against, voting like voter suppression bills, here in Texas. And so it's really great to see that a lot of, different companies and sports organizations, the NCAA, start to stand up for trans youth, especially since our own leaders aren't going to do it. Hopefully this puts the pressure on our leaders who say they're all about fiscal responsibility, money so important to them. So here's this corporation saying, look, a consequence of you being discriminatory is we're going to take this business, this money away from you. And, we really hope that if they're not listening, to our trans youth, which they should be, to be listening to these investments that they say they care so much about.
Yeah, well said. Discrimination is really expensive, and I am waiting for the day when Republican leadership finally figures that out. But yeah, I applaud the NCAA for taking this stance in particular, partially because it lets trans youth know that there are people in their corner who want them to be able to have the same childhood experiences as their peers. And I think that's wonderful. And partially because I mean, there absolutely has been some pushback by state leaders in response to this, and so I appreciate the bravery of the action and the willingness to stand up for what's right, regardless of the consequences. I am hoping that that will inspire lots and lots of Texans to pretty much do the same thing, especially in the coming week.
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you. Thank you so much for your thoughts, everyone. Another bill that I heard about that I'm surprised hasn't gotten more feathers rustled in the business world is this other one that would prohibit trans youth from receiving gender affirming care. Ash, can you tell me more about that bill and what it means?
Yeah, so that's going to be House Bill 1399 that we just had a hearing on. Unfortunately, it passed out of committee already, so we are in hustle mode trying to figure out what our next steps are to get rid of it. So what this bill does is it basically says that young transgender kids, minors, cannot have gender affirming care in Texas, whether that's puberty blockers, whether that's the beginning of hormones to help them transition to the sex of their choice, and a number of other things that we frankly don't actually do to transgender children, or we don't allow them to have until they're older, such as phalloplasty, for example. So it's one of those things that's particularly dangerous because part of the reason that medical transition is so important for so many minors in the first place is because gender dysphoria brings out a lot of feelings of suicidal ideation for a lot of youth. There's the fear about how people will respond to them being trans. There's the feeling that they might be in the wrong body. There's the sensation that this is never going to end and they're never going to be accepted. And so having a team of doctors and supportive parents is so, so important to these kids. And so I sincerely fear that if we take these opportunities away from our kids, we are going to lose some of them to suicide. And it's going to make things incredibly dangerous and difficult for the community as a whole.
And, you know, just like the youth sports ban, I would say this bill is not based in science at all. Every major medical association supports transition care. Studies show that transition care saves lives every year. Gender affirming healthcare is safe, it's essential, and it's a decision that quite honestly needs to be between a doctor and a patient. It shouldn't involve our legislators at all. I would say these bills really harken back to the abortion bills that we're seeing from the legislator as well. They're just a way to control people's lives and their bodies, and they're rooted in hate. And I think that that's a common thread throughout this legislative session that we've seen with bills here and there. But the other thing that I'll add, because I know that this is a really heavy conversation, and a lot of the stuff that we've seen this week, you know, I'm going to be honest, this was probably one of the worst weeks in the Texas legislature that I've ever personally experienced. And I know there are some veterans in the Texas legislature who have said that too. It feels like we're being attacked from all sides with these bills. But I think it's really important to understand that this session will end. There's a very limited amount of time for lawmakers to get all these bills through. None of these bills are at the finish line yet, and there's still a lot more time to organize and make our voices heard. We can delay these bills so that they don't end up getting passed. This fight is not over. So I think that's something I just want to put it in perspective for folks, because I know that this is a really heavy conversation. It's warranted because these bills are terrible and would have terrible implications. But at the same time, this fight is still happening, and we're going to be back at the Capitol every day, every week, continuing to fight against these bills.
Yeah, I want to say I completely agree, and to attack us from all sides with voting rights, abortion access, gender affirming care for trans youth. This is just it's a tool from the oppressor to try to tire you out, to try to make you feel defeated. But we are not tired. We are not defeated. We are even more indignant than we were before, because we knew who you were, but you're really showing us who you are right now. So I think, having these conversations and showing and connecting the dots as to how all of these different fights overlap, I think we can really make something amazing happen and everybody come together and fight for each other, stand up for each other, not just business as legislators, but, us as activists, us as Texans. We're here to care for each other. We did it during the winter storm, right? When we were abandoned by our legislators. This is the legislative storm. We're going to be here for each other. We're going to stand up, and here at Progress, we're going to keep you up to date with how y'all can do that too.
Yeah, thank you for those inspirational words. Ash, are there any things that you'd recommend to our viewers and to everyone in Texas to do to help stop bills like this from passing?
Absolutely. So one of the first things that I would mention is Speaker Dade Phelan needs to hear from as many Texans as possible that we don't need hateful bills like this reaching the House floor for a vote. And so something I've been telling folks is call his office, send him emails, like make sure that he hears from you, because every single person that's doing that is actually taking part in saving lives, which is pretty incredible. So I would recommend that first and foremost. And then, of course, reach out to your own representatives and let them know, like, you expect them to support transgender kids and to help them stay alive, and to get rid of these ridiculous bills. Because Diana said it exactly right. Like, we are all in this together. And so I am looking forward to the sheer amount of allyship that I get to see over the next week from folks. And I'll see you on the front lines.
Thanks, Ash. So speaking of the front lines, I know trans people and trans youth were not the only things under attack this week. Diana and Wesley, I know that we've got some pretty crazy abortion bills that passed out this week. Particularly the one, I know you've mentioned it on the show before, suing people for getting access to healthcare related to abortion. What is that about?
So ridiculous. I can't even believe. Basically, it would mean that anybody, whether they live in Texas or outside of Texas, New York, California, Maine, Oregon, I could keep going on, could sue anyone who had an abortion in Texas. Not only does it not make sense to not see abortion as essential healthcare, this makes even less sense. Why would they propose this? This is so odd. And it would make it so that not only can someone get sued for having an abortion, but also someone can get sued for helping someone have an abortion, giving them money, giving them a ride to an abortion clinic, helping them in any step of the process. They're sued too. And it's just,
that's not going to make some politicians happy with with some of the more scandalous news that comes out.
Yes, definitely, because I know, some people have provided some funds for some other folks for unwanted pregnancies that maybe they thought was more of a priority than everyday Texans. So I think one tool could be let's Matt Geist this shit. You know what I mean? We were able to track where Matt Geist was sending his money. Let's go back into the Venmo of some of these politicians, see who they're sending money to, who, what's happening over there. Let's do some investigation, right there. I think if they realized how they could be tracked as well, I don't know if they would be down for this either, but it's just really, really wild.
I agree, Diana. And just to a couple of clarification points. So that bill that we were talking about is House Bill 1515. And not only does it allow for folks to sue someone who helps someone get an abortion, and that's anybody. So if there's an anti-abortion extremist on the other side of the state, they could sue a parent for driving their daughter to the abortion clinic to get an abortion. They could sue the doctor. For example, a rapist could sue the victim for getting, could sue the victim's doctor for performing an abortion. These are terrible bills and they have extreme implications. And one thing that I want to point out is that this legislation, so it wasn't just this bill that passed, it was a slate of like 6 or 7 extreme anti-abortion bills. They're moving so quickly through the legislature. So it's important that we're showing up to speak out against these bills, one, to slow them down because this session has moved so quickly, but then also so that we can continue to voice what we want to see and the Texas that we imagine. because the fact of the matter is these bills, we're having to play defense, but we also need to play offense. And so one thing that our organization, along with a lot of other of our partner orgs within the Trust, Respect, Access Coalition are calling for is for the Abortion is Healthcare Act to receive a hearing. And that act is a bill filed by Representative Donna Howard. And it's one that would reverse all kinds of extreme anti-abortion restrictions that have been passed over the past few decades within the Texas legislature. We want a Texas where people have access to essential health care, and abortion is essential health care. And so bills like that are what our lawmakers should be focused on, not these extreme bills. Politicians are allowing their extremist agendas to control whether Texans have access to essential medical care. They're doing it with those trans bills that they're passing, and they're doing it with these abortion bans that they're trying to pass as well.
So, Ash, it seems like a lot of these bills are filed and proposed by kind of tin men, people without hearts. If you didn't have a conscience or a heart, is there any legislation that you'd want to pass?
If I didn't have a conscience?
I mean, yeah, if you didn't have a conscience, would you like the Ash gets paid, $500,000 a year? Is that the kind of route that you would go? It's kind of boggling to me why politicians seem to be wanting to push agendas that are really harmful to people.
Yeah, and honestly, it's difficult for me to get into that mindset because I like all of you and like so many Texans, like I care so much about people and I want us all to take care of each other. And so, yeah, when I see bills, especially like the one we were just talking about that also criminalizes helping each other, that tells me that our opponents are really scared of the power that we have and what we're able to do for each other. And so that makes me want to help people even more,
Absolutely. Well, definitely speaking of like people helping people, there's been some pretty crazy voting bills, especially around assistance and assisting voters and assisting people with disabilities and people who are in nursing homes. Wes, I know there are some pretty crazy bills again this week in the elections committee. What are some of the ones that you saw? I mean, one I saw was the prove your disability provision. Do you want to talk about that one a little bit?
Yeah, so that's House Bill 3920, which would require folks who are voting by mail to prove that they have a disability in order to vote by mail. And this is something that we've seen with SB 7 and HB 6 as well. They've had certain provisions that would require it. I think that actually because of activists and folks who have spoken out against that provision, that's actually been removed from some of those larger omnibus bills. But this bill specifically is just focused on folks having to prove their disability. And, one, we think that's a violation of HIPAA. People shouldn't have to show proof that they have a disability in order to vote. And it's also just discrimination in general because you're requiring something of folks with disabilities that you're not requiring of other people who are headed out to the polls to vote. Another crazy bill that we saw this week, and one that is very extreme, is HB 895, which would allow partisan poll watchers to take pictures of people's pictures of people's IDs. If they suspect that people are voting with a fake ID. And that bill is one, that's not a power that election workers have. It's not a power that election officials, election judges have. It's a power that would be given solely to partisan poll watchers who are there under the guise of watching the polls, but are really there as part of a party and have their own agenda at hand. And so we know that partisan poll watchers have a history of discriminating against, harassing, and intimidating voters of color. And that bill, we fear, would just make that even more likely because it would give them powers that they really don't need and that they don't currently have.
Yeah, definitely. And I know I'd mentioned before that, this last election was my mom's first time voting, and same with or not same, but my dad has gone voting before by himself, but they live in an area of rural Texas where there are Confederate flags everywhere, and I am often very concerned for them and for their safety. And, thanks to, or not thanks to, but, Texas has always had a history of white supremacy and the violence that comes from it. And so I would hate to have to warn my parents as to taking safety precautions to go vote. That's just terrible. And I think this is just one other way of legislators trying to silence our voices, right? Because our votes are our voices when they say, there are some voices that we just don't want to be as loud and don't tend to vote for us. And so that's them choosing their voters instead of voters, choosing them. And so, like we've said before, these bills haven't 100% passed. There is still time to get involved. There is still time to stop this from happening. There is still time to kill all of the suppression.
Absolutely. And, this has me thinking about how, when we're forcing people with disabilities to prove they have a disability, like we're saying we don't trust people with disabilities. And this poll watcher bill is similar. We're saying we don't trust Texas voters. And these medical bills that the trans community is facing, we don't trust transgender kids. We don't trust their doctors. It's ridiculous. And so I guess what I really, really hope Texans think about is like, we ought to trust each other. We ought to be building a culture of trust and mutual respect. And so I hope that we all trust voters, people with disabilities, trans kids, their doctors, their parents. And frankly, we deserve leadership that trusts us too and legislates like they trust us.
Definitely. But there's definitely some people in the legislature that I don't even have a minute of trust for. And I think we've heard the name before. We know I wouldn't say love him, but Briscoe Cain has been just a shifty guy this whole legislative session. And there seems to be a lot of things happening in behind closed doors and secret meetings. Wes, I heard you guys had a little bit of a run-in with the election committee this week. Do you want to tell us about that before we close out for the day?
Yes, definitely. So just a really funny story. Diane and I didn't realize this, but apparently when the committees vote on bills, apparently a lot of the time they do it behind closed doors. So folks who are in the public aren't necessarily able to keep up with what's being voted on and what's being passed. Diana and I knew that the House Elections Committee, who is chaired by Briscoe Cain, had a meeting scheduled, and we wanted to go see what bills were going to get passed. So we were at the Capitol, and we tried to go into I think it's the Agriculture Museum is what the room is called. We tried to go into the room where they were voting on these bills, and we walked in, and there were like some guard security people, I don't know what to call them there, but they were like, "Are y'all staffers?" And Diana and I said, "No, we're just here to watch. We want to observe." And they're like, "Oh, you need to leave." And so they kicked us out of the room. But how wild is that? Because I know that's something that a lot of reporters have complained about too, is that they don't always know what bills are being passed. And so unless you have a connection to a staffer of one of the reps who are in the committee or one of the representatives themselves, it can be very delayed before you actually know, like, oh, these bills made it through committee and were passed out of committee. So that's just one of the shenanigans that we were up to this week at the Texas Capitol. I learn something new every week. So
Yeah, looking back, I wish I would have yelled, "Briscoe, you suck," before we were kicked out.
I mean, we should just have that on t-shirts. So
yes.
Let's just walk around with them. Well, thanks so much, Ash, our special guest, for joining us this week. Diana and Wesley, it's always good to see you in the squares. And thank you so much for lending your expertise, everyone. To everyone who's watching and to listening, thanks for joining us. You can head over to progresstexas.org to follow us on social and subscribe to our email list. If you're listening to us, subscribe to us on any of your favorite podcast apps. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.